In the 1830s, deep beneath the city of Liverpool, a gang of railway navvies were hacking a tunnel through solid rock by candlelight. They were tough men, hard men, men who were not easily frightened. And then, without warning, the ground gave way beneath their feet, and a hole opened up into a black, empty space that should not have been there. They lifted their lanterns and looked down into the dark. And the dark looked back, because staring up at them out of the hole were the soot-blackened faces of other men. Men with picks and shovels. Men who were also digging, down there, in a place no map showed, in a tunnel that officially did not exist. The navvies dropped their tools and ran. They scrambled back up the shaft, screaming that they had broken through into the kingdom of the devil himself, that they had dug too deep and found hell, and that hell was full of workmen. They were wrong. What they had broken into was not hell. It was something stranger. It was the secret, private, underground world of a single man, a tobacco merchant, a millionaire, an eccentric who, for nearly 30 years, paid an army of labourers to dig a vast and pointless maze of tunnels beneath the streets of Liverpool. Tunnels that lead nowhere, that cross and double back and dead end against solid stone, that serve no purpose anyone has ever been able to explain. He never told a soul why he did it. He took the secret to his grave. And almost 200 years later, with engineers and historians and archaeologists still crawling through the dark and arguing, we are no closer to the truth. This is the story of Joseph Williamson, the mole of Edge Hill and the riddle he buried under a city. To understand the tunnels, you first have to understand the man. And Joseph Williamson was, by every account that survives, one of the strangest men ever to walk the streets of Liverpool. He was not born to money. He was born in 1769, somewhere in the north of England, into an ordinary family, and as a boy of just 11 years old he was sent, or simply left, to make his own way in the booming, brawling port city of Liverpool. This was a place exploding with money in those years. Ships from every corner of the world crowded the docks. Fortunes in cotton, in sugar, in tobacco, and in the grim trade in human beings were being made and lost on the waterfront every single day. And into this churning city walked a penniless 11-year-old with nothing and no one. He found work in the tobacco and snuff business of a merchant named Richard Tate. And the boy was sharp. He was tireless. He worked his way up, year after year, from the very bottom, until he had made himself indispensable. When Richard Tate died, Williamson eventually took over the entire business. And then he did something that bound his fortune to the family forever. He married his old master's daughter, Elizabeth Tate. Even his wedding day told you exactly what kind of man Liverpool was dealing with. On the morning he married Elizabeth, Joseph Williamson went through the ceremony, and then, still wearing his wedding clothes, he turned around and went off hunting for the rest of the day, leaving his new bride behind. That was Williamson. He did what he wanted, when he wanted, and he answered to absolutely nobody. By now he was a very wealthy man. The tobacco trade had made him rich, and he was shrewd with property. He could have done what other rich men of his age did. Bought a country estate, retired to a life of comfort, collected fine art, played the gentleman. He did none of those things. Instead, he turned his attention, and his enormous fortune, to a patch of high ground on the edge of the city. A windswept, half-empty stretch of sandstone called Edge Hill, and there, on a plot known as the Long Broom Field, on a street called Mason Street, Joseph Williamson began to build. And from the very beginning, what he built made no sense. He put up houses, solid, large houses, but he built them without architects, without plans, without any of the careful drawings that any normal builder would use. He seems to have simply directed the work himself, day by day, out of his own head. And the results were, in the words of those who saw them, of the strangest description. The houses were riddled with oddities, rooms of bizarre shapes, staircases that climbed up to nothing, windows set into walls that looked out onto solid brick so that no light could ever pass through them, doors that opened onto blank stone. It was as though the buildings had been designed by someone working to a logic that existed only inside his own mind. A logic he never bothered to share. The respectable people of Liverpool did not know what to make of him. He was rich enough that they could not dismiss him. Yet he dressed plainly, often shabbily, his clothes stained with tobacco. He was gruff, blunt, and impatient with the polite rituals of the wealthy. He had no interest in their good opinion. He became a figure of gossip and rumour. The eccentric of Edge Hill, the strange rich man on Mason Street, who built houses that didn't work. But the houses were only the beginning, because at some point, and we don't know exactly when, though it seems to have been around the year 1810, Joseph Williamson stopped building upward and started digging down. It began, as far as anyone can tell, almost reasonably. His houses on Mason Street were built on the high ridge of Edge Hill, and behind them the ground dropped away. To create level gardens behind the properties, large brick arches were thrown across the slope, and the ground was built up on top of them. That much a sensible man might do. But Williamson did not stop there. He kept building arches, and then arches beneath the arches, and tunnels leading off from the arches, and chambers opening off the tunnels, and more tunnels beyond those. And he never stopped. For the better part of 30 years, Joseph Williamson employed a small army of labourers, at times scores of men, perhaps hundreds across the whole span of the work, to do nothing but excavate and brick line an ever-growing labyrinth beneath his land. They cut into the soft red sandstone. They lined the passages with brick and stone, arching them over with real skill and craftsmanship. They dug down through level after level, and the network spread out beneath the streets of Edge Hill, a hidden world of vaulted passageways and great echoing halls, growing year by year, entirely out of sight. To get a sense of the scale, consider the single most famous chamber that has been rediscovered. They call it the Banqueting Hall. It is a vast vaulted room, around 70 feet long, more than 20 feet wide, and some 20 feet high. A cathedral-like cavern hollowed out of the earth and lined in brick. And around it run smaller passages, some barely 4 feet wide and 6 feet high, just big enough for a man to stoop and shuffle through. Tunnels stacked on tunnels, some plunging down at steep angles, some ending abruptly at a blank wall of solid sandstone, as if the diggers had simply been told to stop, for no reason, and start somewhere else. The whole thing covers an area bounded by several streets, and here is the unsettling truth that remains to this day. Nobody knows how big it really is. Much of the network is still choked with rubble, still unexplored, still waiting in the dark. Every time the volunteers who now dig here clear another passage, it seems to lead to another and another. The full extent of what Joseph Williamson built beneath Liverpool has never been mapped. It may never be. And try for a moment to picture what it actually took to make this place. There were no machines, no drills, no diggers, no electric light. Everything you see down there was cut and carried out by hand. Men working by the flicker of candles and oil lamps, breathing thick dust, swinging picks at the sandstone, hour after hour in the cold and the damp, while above their heads the ordinary city went about its day, never guessing what was happening beneath the pavement. Barrow after barrow of broken rock hauled up into the daylight and tipped away. Brick after brick laid by hand to arch over the void. Some of these men spent years of their lives down in Williamson's dark, and not one of them, as far as we know, was ever told what it was for. They simply turned up each morning, climbed down into the earth, dug a tunnel toward nothing, and collected their wages. An entire workforce kept permanently in the dark, in every sense of the word, by an employer who guarded his reasons like a secret worth killing for. And that brings us to the question that has haunted this story for 2 centuries. The question Williamson himself refused again and again to answer. Why? Why would a sane, intelligent, fabulously wealthy man spend the last 3 decades of his life and a vast slice of his fortune paying men to dig tunnels that go nowhere and do nothing? Tunnels with no entrance for carts, no connection to the docks, no cellars for storing goods to sell, no logic of trade or profit at all. What was it all for? Over the years, people have offered four main answers. And the strange thing is, none of them quite fits. The first and the kindest is that it was an act of charity. Remember the time Williamson was living in. The long wars against Napoleon finally ended in 1815. And when they ended, tens of thousands of soldiers came home to a country that had no work for them. Liverpool filled with desperate, unemployed men. Hunger was everywhere. And the way the wealthy dealt with the poor in those days was the workhouse and the handout. Charity that came with shame attached, that stripped a man of his pride. Joseph Williamson, the story goes, despised that. He understood something about poverty that the comfortable did not. He spoke of how being poor brought with it what he called the attendant curse of stifled self-respect, the way that taking charity hollows a man out, robs him of his dignity. And so, rather than hand out money for nothing, Williamson gave the unemployed men of Edge Hill something to do. He paid them to dig. It did not matter that the digging was useless. What mattered was that a man could earn an honest wage, hold his head up, feed his family, and keep his pride. The tunnels in this telling were never the point at all. The work was the point. The tunnels were just where the work happened to go. It's a beautiful theory. It made Williamson a hero to many. They called him the King of Edge Hill for his generosity. But it has a problem, because if the only goal was to give men work, you could have them dig and fill in the same hole forever. You wouldn't need to brickline vast cathedral halls with real craftsmanship. You wouldn't build with such care and ambition. The tunnels are too elaborate, too deliberate, too built to be mere busywork. Somebody wanted them to exist, which leads to the second, far darker theory, that Joseph Williamson was building to survive the end of the world. There is a persistent story that Williamson had fallen in with an extreme religious sect, one of the many doom-laden movements of that anxious age that preached the imminent end of all things, the apocalypse, Armageddon, the destruction of the world above. And that Williamson, believing it, set out to build himself and his chosen friends a refuge. A hidden ark of brick and stone, deep underground, where the faithful could shelter and survive while the world above was consumed. Picture it. The vast banqueting hall, not as an eccentric's folly, but as a survival chamber, a place to gather the saved. The endless storage passages, stocked for the long darkness after the end. A whole subterranean kingdom, built in secret to outlast the apocalypse. It is a chilling idea. And it would explain the obsessive scale of the thing, the refusal to ever stop. If you truly believed the end was coming, you would dig until the day you died. The trouble is, there is no hard evidence Williamson ever belonged to such a sect, or ever said any such thing. It is a rumour, a brilliant, haunting rumour, but a rumour all the same, stitched together after his death to explain the unexplainable. The third theory is the most boring, and for that reason it may be the most likely, that there was no grand purpose at all, that Williamson was simply quarrying stone. Recent research by academics has suggested that the whole operation was, at heart, a business. Edge Hill sat on good sandstone, and the growing city of Liverpool had an endless hunger for building stone. Dig out the rock, sell the rock, and the tunnels are simply the empty spaces left behind once the valuable stone has been carted away and sold. The arches and brick linings were just to stop the whole hill collapsing as the stone was removed. It's plausible. It's practical. But even this doesn't quite close the case, because it doesn't explain the strangeness. The tunnels that lead nowhere useful. The chambers built far grander than any quarry needs. The sheer secrecy of a man who never simply said, "I am quarrying stone." A quarryman doesn't behave like Williamson behaved. And that points to the fourth and final theory, which may be the truest of all. That Joseph Williamson dug because Joseph Williamson wanted to dig. That somewhere inside this gruff, brilliant, lonely, immensely wealthy man was an obsession that needed no justification. A compulsion to build and to control and to create a world entirely his own, beneath the feet of a city that never understood him. Perhaps the tunnels meant nothing. Perhaps they meant everything. Perhaps they were simply the shape that one strange man's mind took, pressed into the earth. We will never know. And that is precisely why the story still grips us. Whatever drove him, the man himself remained an enigma to everyone around him, right to the end. The anecdotes that survive paint a portrait of someone who took a deep, almost mischievous pleasure in confounding people's expectations. There is the famous story of the dinner party. Williamson, the millionaire, invited a group of well-to-do guests to his home for a grand meal. They arrived in their finery, expecting a feast worthy of a rich man's table. And what they were served was plain porridge and hard, dry biscuits. Nothing more. A poor man's scraps. Many of the guests were offended. They made their excuses and left sniffing at the insult. But a few stayed, ate the humble food without complaint, kept the old man company, took him as they found him. And only then did Williamson reveal what the whole thing had been: a test. The ones who walked out had come for his money and his table. The ones who stayed were his real friends. And to those few, the story goes, he then threw open the doors to a proper feast. That was Williamson all over. He trusted no one's flattery. He cared nothing for appearances. He measured people by their character, not their manners, and he was perfectly happy to look like a madman in order to find out who was genuine. He was, by all accounts, good to the men who dug for him. He worked among them, knew them, paid them fairly. To the labourers of Edge Hill he was not the Mad Mole. That name came later. To them he was the man who put bread on their tables when the rest of the world had turned its back. Whatever the truth of the tunnels, the dignity he gave those men was real. And then there was that extraordinary collision with the future, the moment his secret world crashed headlong into the dawn of the railway age. In the 1830s, the railways were arriving, and Liverpool was at the very heart of that revolution. Engineers were boring a great tunnel through Edge Hill itself to carry the new trains into Lime Street station in the centre of the city. The work was directed by the most famous railway engineers in the world, and their navvies, blasting and digging through the rock, had no idea that the very same hill was already riddled, like a honeycomb, with the private tunnels of Joseph Williamson, until the day their floor fell in. And they found themselves staring down at Williamson's workmen, calmly digging away in a tunnel that belonged on no plan and no map, and fled in terror, certain they had broken into the realm of the devil. Think about what that moment really was. Two completely different worlds, meeting underground by pure accident. On one side, the railway, public, rational, world-changing, the engine of the modern age, driving its iron road into the future. On the other, Williamson's Labyrinth, private, secret, purposeless, the obsession of one unknowable man, leading nowhere at all. The new world had quite literally dug straight into the old one's hidden dream. When it was all explained, the engineers and Williamson are said to have met and politely inspected each other's works. The man of the future and the mole of Edge Hill shaking hands in the dark. But Williamson's age was already ending. On the 1st of May, 1840, Joseph Williamson died at around the age of 71. And with him died the only mind that ever held the full plan of the tunnels, if a full plan had ever existed at all. He left no map. He left no explanation. He left no answer to the question the whole city had been asking for 30 years. The secret simply went into the ground with him. He was buried in his wife's family vault, and the great work fell silent. The picks stopped, the labourers drifted away to other jobs, and the vast underground kingdom he had spent a fortune and half a lifetime creating was left to the dark. What happened next was, in its way, the saddest part of the whole story. The tunnels were not preserved. They were not celebrated. They were simply forgotten, and worse than forgotten, they became a convenience. As the city of Liverpool grew and pressed in around Edge Hill, the tunnels became the perfect place to dump what nobody wanted. For decades, through the late 19th century and into the 20th, they were used as rubbish tips. Household waste, builders' rubble, ash, broken crockery, old bottles, the debris of a growing city, all of it was tipped down into Williamson's beautiful brick passages until, one by one, they choked and filled and vanished. The houses on Mason Street were eventually pulled down. The entrances were sealed or built over. And the labyrinth slipped out of memory altogether until it survived only as a half-believed local legend. A story old men told about a mad rich man who once dug tunnels under the hill long ago, for most of the 20th century. That is all the Williamson Tunnels were. A rumour beneath the streets. People living and working in Edge Hill walked over them every day, and had no idea that beneath their feet lay one of the strangest constructions in all of Britain, packed tight with the rubbish of 100 years. And then, near the end of the century, people began to dig again. From the 1990s onward, driven by local enthusiasts and historical societies who refused to let the legend die, serious efforts began to find and reopen the tunnels. Archaeological investigations got underway in 1995. Volunteers, ordinary people, giving up their weekends, began the backbreaking, filthy, dangerous work of clearing out a century and a half of compacted refuse, bucket by bucket, by hand. And slowly, out of the dark, Williamson's world began to reappear. The great Banqueting Hall was found again. Passages were traced. Chambers were opened that no human being had set foot in for well over 100 years. And the rubbish that had buried the tunnels turned out to be a kind of treasure of its own. A perfectly sealed time capsule of Victorian Liverpool. As the diggers cleared the passages, they pulled out thousands of artifacts, old glass bottles by the crate, broken pottery and crockery, clay pipes, military buttons and badges, fragments of vintage advertising signs, the ordinary cast-offs of a vanished city, some of it dating right back to Williamson's own time in the 1830s. Each bucket of spoil was a lucky dip into the 19th century. Today, parts of the network have been made safe and open to the public. You can go down into Edge Hill, descend out of the daylight, and walk through the cool, damp, echoing passages that Joseph Williamson built. The air changes as you go down, colder, heavier still. The noise of the modern city, the traffic and the voices, fades away above you until there is nothing but the sound of your own footsteps and the slow, patient drip of water seeping through brick. Your lamp throws shadows that lurch along the curved walls. Side passages open off into blackness on either side, some of them sealed, some of them simply swallowed by the dark, leading who knows where. And the strangest feeling of all is how finished it is. How carefully made, how solid, how permanent. This is not a mine hacked out in a hurry. It is built. Somebody cared deeply that it should last. You can stand in the banqueting hall and look up at that vast brick vault arcing over your head and try to imagine the man who ordered it dug and the small army of forgotten labourers who cut it out of the rock by candlelight. You can run your hand along brickwork that has not seen the sun for 2 centuries. And the whole time, the same thought presses in on you from every side. All of this, and for what? But for all that has been uncovered, the heart of the mystery is exactly as dark as it ever was. Because we still do not know why. We have cleared the passages and we have not found the answer. There is no hidden chamber with an explanation carved into the wall. There is no document, no confession, no plan. Much of the labyrinth is still buried, still unexplored, still spreading out beneath the streets into the black. And the one question that matters, the question that sent those railwaymen screaming up out of the earth, the question the whole city whispered for 30 years, has never been answered, and almost certainly never will be. A penniless boy walked into Liverpool with nothing. He made a fortune, and he spent the end of that fortune, and the end of his life, carving a secret kingdom into the rock beneath the city. A maze of halls and tunnels leading nowhere, for a reason he refused to ever share. And then he closed his mouth and died, and let the earth keep his secret. The tunnels are still down there. You can walk them today. And as you stand in the dark, beneath the feet of the living city, listening to the drip of water on 200-year-old brick, there is only one honest thing left to say about Joseph Williamson, the mole of Edge Hill. He won. The secret is still his. If you want more of the hidden history buried beneath Britain's cities, the strange, the forgotten, and the unexplained, then subscribe and we'll take you down into the next one, because some men build monuments to be remembered. Joseph Williamson built one that no one will ever understand.